Hello, welcome to Community Unity Now, the D Tycoon Show. My name is Bill Morton, and I'm co-host of the D Tycoon Show, along with Trudy Leong. And sometimes we switch it up, so this is my turn this time. We're here with our special guest, Fidel Arroyo Jr. of the Wage Hour Division. How's it going, Fidel?
It's going great. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Wage Hour Division is?
Well, the Wage Hour Division is a department under the umbrella of the U.S. Department of Labor. As a division, we enforce multiple labor laws in order to make sure that the employers around the country comply with the regulations under a specific labor act. Also, I would like to add that not only do we enforce the law, but we also make every effort to reach out to both employers and employees to educate them about how to comply with the laws. For the employers, of course, to comply with the law. As for the employees, we inform them the rights that they have when it comes to federal labor laws. We make every effort to achieve and promote compliance when it comes to federal laws.
What are some other divisions of the U.S. Department of Labor, and how do these divisions achieve the mission of the U.S. Department of Labor?
Well, we have OSHA. OSHA is another agency under the umbrella of the U.S. Department of Labor, and their job is mainly to keep workers safe, making sure that the workspace has the proper tools to keep them safe. And we also have EBSA, which is Employee Benefit Security Administration. They're in charge of regulating uh, employee benefits as far as 401k, insurance, that sort of things. And there's also many other agencies under the U.S. Department of Labor. We have OIG, which is the Office of Inspector General. They do other law enforcement that has both civil and criminal cases as well.
And how does the Wage Hour Division differ from the Illinois Department of Labor?
Well, for instance, um, we have jurisdiction all over the United States and including properties that consider properties of the United States. And the Illinois Department of Labor, they can only enforce their laws in the state of Illinois. So that's the major one. We obviously can enforce every law that involves labor. So the state also has the power to enforce different laws that we don't enforce as well.
So, how does the Wage Hour Division work with unions?
Well, um, we work with the unions many different ways. One of the ways that we work with the unions, we try to, as for me, I'm the community, I also do community outreach. So I reach out to different unions and I promote what we do. And I also offer our services as far as presenting to their communities, to their members, the laws that we enforce. And sometimes the unions, they they also give us a call to file a complaint on behalf of an employee or a member of the group, and instead of having the employee filing a complaint for them.
And so, how can a non union employee benefit from the Wage Hour Division?
The the laws that we enforce applies to any U.S. worker, any U.S. worker, whether they're under the union or they're non-union employees. It doesn't matter. It, it covers those who are who the law applies to. So it doesn't matter if they're non or are union employees.
And how do you work with the employees?
Well, there's a different ways of working with the employees. I excuse my pets. I um, well, not only do we encourage them to file a complaint with us, but we also try to tell them that that if they, not only does it affect them, but if it affects anybody that they know, their employer is not complying with the laws, that they can file a complaint for them, or they can. There's different ways of working with them, but for the most part, we just work with them by letting them know the services that and the protections that they have under the wage and hour division.
Will and can an employer request how the investigation was initiated by the employer or the union?
Well, the employer can, and in most cases, ask how the case was initiated. Fortunately for those employees who file a complaint, our investigators do not and will not disclose the source of our investigation. The person or a group of persons will be kept confidential. And as a department, we take confidentiality very serious, and we will make every effort to keep it that way. And I hope that your viewers understand that. So they should feel comfortable communicating with us with any questions or concerns that they might have.
And do employees often call the wage hour division to complain about their workplace?
They call to, because not only do they have questions, but they also have concerns, and not necessarily do they they file a complaint with us. They don't, for the most part, they don't try to file a complaint. They just want to find some information. Hey, listen, this is happening to me. I don't want any problems with my employer. I'm happy with my work, but unfortunately, the problem or the issue is not with the employer, it's with the supervisor who's supervising my unit. So I just want to get some answers to my questions, and maybe I can settle this with them without involving the feds, or any other agency. So we answer their questions, and sometimes we let them know the severity of, depending on what they told us. We try to tell them, hey, I think the best thing to do is to file a complaint, and only because if you don't want to do it for yourself, it's also affecting the rest of your coworkers. So, and we'll keep you confidential. But for the most part, we give them a chance to think it over. And for the most part, they call back within a couple of days because they try to work it out with the employer. And sometimes the employer doesn't budge, even though they're like, hey, listen, I found out this information that you're not in compliance. So let's work it out. Let's change things instead of involving anybody. And sometimes the employer just wants to show that power and disagrees with them. And so they call back again to file the complaint.
And what would you say to our viewers who are undocumented employees who would like to file a complaint, but they fear that it would affect their status?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, it doesn't matter what status you have in the United States. Every employee, every worker, U.S. worker, it doesn't have to be a citizen, it doesn't have to be a permanent resident, or somebody here on a visa or illegal. The law applies to them. And we never have any of our staff members, when somebody calls, ask them about their status or immigration status. So they can file the complaint, and they have the same rights as a normal U.S. citizen has.
And then at the end of the investigation, does the complainant have to testify, or do you take care of that? If they're undocumented and they fear losing their job or their status, would they have to testify at the end of the complaint?
I really hate to say this, but it all depends on the case. Every case is different. Every case is unique on its own. Sometimes the case gets very complicated and it has to be taken to court. So for the most part, an investigator, what they're trying to do is to try to handle every case that they are assigned administratively, meaning outside of the courts. And sometimes it gets so complicated that we have no other choice but to file with the courts. And in that situation, depending on how the investigation process was made by the investigator, if it's complicated and the judge requests that he needs each employee affected by this case to testify, then we notify all the employees who were affected in this case or involved in this case, and we let them know, listen, unfortunately, for the most part, we try to keep maintain everybody confidential. But this case has turned a different direction. And there's a possibility that we might need you to testify. And unfortunately, for those who are not documented, there might be some issues. But for the most part, we don't. It doesn't really happen that often. And most of the employees, they go ahead and testify. There might be some cases out there. I can't speak for every case in the United States, but I'm sure there's a case out there that employees who are undocumented refuse to testify in court.
And speaking on compliance, does that change very often?
What do you mean by if compliance changes?
Like the different laws, do they change?
They don't change. So what happens is they get amended. So depending on the administration, they all have their own agenda, and sometimes they want to make some changes or add to a specific act, and so they amend it. And so there's a different investigation process that changes along with that. But it's not that it's rare. It just, what happens, the agency, our national office, which is Washington, what they do is they release an opinion letter based on the act that they're looking into. So I guess you can say it changes, but not in a big way.
And have you had to adjust to some of these amendments in the past?
Oh, yes.
And how?
Yes.
Maybe an example.
An example, I can give you an example as far as, tipped employees in the restaurant industry. We've had, different opinions in different administrations stating that a tip pool can be shared with managers, and we have had to change because it was changed or amended as an opinion letter that managers should not be included in the tip pool. So it's something that we have to be prepared as investigators with any changes, and whether we believe it should change or not, our job is to enforce the law, whatever is given to us.
How often does an investigation usually take to complete, and are most investigations basically the same?
I really try saying this word again, but for this question, I might say that it depends. It depends on the act that we are investigating, meaning what and where does the alleged violation fall under which act? If it's an FLSA investigation, which is generally a violation that could be either a minimum wage violation, an overtime violation that includes record keeping violation, or a child labor violation. All those examples that I just mentioned falls under the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. And the other acts include, but it's not limited to, the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a law that requires covered employers to provide employees with job protected and unpaid leave for qualified medical and family reasons. Or if it's a Davis-Bacon case, and that's a federal law that establishes the requirement for paying the local prevailing wage on a federal construction project for several construction occupations. So we, as the Wage and Hour Division, we are responsible for administrating um, and enforcing a number of federal laws. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go over them all, but those I just mentioned are among them. And having said all that, I'll go back to the original question. Federal labor laws are very complex. No case is easier than the other. And like I said before, it depends on how long it takes for our investigators to gather all the information needed to complete a case, such as um, receiving requested payroll records and corresponding timesheets, employee contact information from the employer, locating both current and former employees to interview them. And if applicable to the case, if the alleged violation are substantiated by our investigators, we will then compute back wages for those employees affected by the violation disclosed and substantiated. All of that takes time and great consideration from our investigators. And to get it right, not just for the employee, but for the employers as well. Everyone should remember that we're not just here for the employees, but we're here for the employers too. They have rights too.
So on that note, when you start an investigation about when you start the investigation, do the employers always end up in a court situation, or sometimes it doesn't lead to anything? Does it always lead to something?
No, we've had not all cases go to court.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when for the most part, our investigators are. I'm proud to say that they're that good, and when they do their work, and they present. So what happens is this is the process. The complaint is filed. It waits to be reviewed, the complaint, by management team. And then once they see that it's a valid complaint, then it's awaiting to be assigned to an investigator. Once it gets assigned to an investigator, the investigator then contacts the person who filed the complaint and they get a statement from them. And then the investigator starts their investigation by either doing surveillance, contacting other employees from getting the information from the person who filed the complaint, and then it notifies the employer that there's an investigation being conducted on their establishment. So then there's paperwork required and requested by the investigator, and we investigate going back 2 years. So whenever the investigation starts, we go back 2 years. So any person that worked during that time, whether it's a current or former employee, they are going to be interviewed. Then we have what we call whether or not the investigator substantiated the allegation. And if they did, they compute back wages. And then that information, then there is a final conference meeting where the employer and the employer representatives, which could be the CPA, CFO, lawyer, they meet with the investigators, and the investigators goes over what was found and how much they're going to have to pay in back wages, and if civil money penalties and liquidated damages are applied to that case. So during that, it's a long process, but all that is presented to the employer at a final conference. And so when all that information is provided, the employer then knows, there's nothing else that I can do. If we go to court, we might have to pay more. Then they have to pay legal fees. You know what I'm saying? So for the most part, they do not. There are some employers, though, that they still feel they're adamant about what they feel, and they have every right to do so. And if they want to go to court, then we'll go to court. Usually the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, for the most part and all the time, we will not go to court unless we have a case that we were able to substantiate.
And so you represent the current employees. Have you ever represented former employees with a complaint?
Absolutely, all the time.
Hmm.
The time. Because when we do an investigation, it's not just for one employee. The one employee is the one that filed a complaint. So um, what we do is we investigate for all the employees that work during the 2-year period of our investigation, whether they work 2 weeks, whether they work a year, or the 2 years or more. Um, we review the records, both payroll registers and corresponding timesheets. So any employee that worked during the investigation period is covered for that investigation.
And what do you do about employees? Of course, employers may not want to work with you, but what if an employee doesn't want to have anything to do with it?
So, go ahead. I'm sorry. I
Go
take it
ahead.
with me.
Go ahead.
So, we've had those situations, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. We've had employees several times that they file a complaint, and when the complaint is being reviewed and then it gets approved and then it gets assigned to the investigator then, after it gets assigned, contacts the employee who filed a complaint. And there's been instances where the employee then tells um, the investigator that they no longer want this to move forward. Do not contact me no more. I, for whatever reason, right? And the investigator then, our thing is like, well, we're going to go continue forward with or without your cooperation. So by you just saying, I don't want this, I want this investigation to end, that's not going to work. The investigation continues. And it
Okay.
happens all.
And do you only investigate businesses or corporations? Do you investigate institutions, government agencies, nonprofit
Yeah.
organizations? I don't know. What do you?
Yeah.
How far does it go?
So, well, we don't investigate federal agencies.
Hmm.
I've been a part of investigating um, um, jails, county jails, I would say city halls, different city halls from different townships, not just here across the United States. I was transferred from Texas, so I did some investigations there too. So, and I'm not the only one. There's other investigators too. So, it stops with the U.S. federal government because the federal government has their own watchdog, what the public calls, and that's the Office of Inspector General. So every department has a watchdog, Office of Inspector General, that investigates any wrongdoing within that department.
So anything from city hall on down in government,
Even state,
you
I've
can
done
investigate.
state.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Very cool. So what kind of efforts do you make to educate both the employers and the employees? What kind of outreach do you do?
Um, so what I do, that's my role. My role is to communicate, to reach out to all the communities and present them this valuable information and to let them know how it would be very beneficial to them and to their communities. Um, Obviously, um, some of them take my offer, some of them don't. So my job is to call them, email them. And when I do, I not only just call them or email them, I try to send them, attachments, links to the tools that are available to them if they ever have any questions or concerns, or they just want to read. So it all depends on the industry. So I'm always ready. So if I contact chambers of commerce, I try to give them links to things that will benefit the employers, and for community organizations that are on the side of the employees, I send them information about the same thing about things that will benefit protections for the employees. And I also try to reach out to consulates, local ward offices, so I can reach out to all the communities. So it's not just one part of the city or one part of an area where we're focusing on. We want to help everybody. At the same time, I also reach out to community organizations, not to just pass that information, but to also offer our services. For me to do presentations, whether it's the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, the Davis-Bacon, which is federal government contracts, or any other laws that we enforce, agriculture, H-2A cases, H-2B. So that's what we do.
In our final minute or so, what long-term problem do you feel that we must address?
Well, I feel that the public should know that we as an agency can't do it alone. We need the community's help. If the information that I provide to them through my presentations or interviews, like the one today, is affecting them or anyone or someone that they know who is being affected by this, call us. You don't necessarily have to file a complaint when you call us. You can simply give us a call just to get answers to your questions or concerns. And after doing so, you can decide whether you want to go ahead and file a complaint. So basically, we need everybody's help. And the more outreach that I'm able to do, the more folks out there in the communities would know that we're there, available, and ready to help them.
Could you please give us your contact information really quickly, please?
Sure. My name is Fidel Arroyo, FidelArroyo. My telephone number is 210-885-6897. Again, 210-885-6897. And my email address is arroyo.fidel@dol.gov, which is gov. And I'll say it again, just arroyo.fidel@dol.gov.
Thank you so much, Fidel. I appreciate you coming on, and please contact Fidel of the Wage Hour Division if you have an issue with your wages. This is D Tycoon Show. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Take care.